April 1935. Harlem was breathing through clenched teeth, squeezed tight by the Great Depression, a place where hunger lived quietly and pride died loudly, where men stood on street corners not to talk but to be noticed, hoping a passing glance might turn into work that almost never came, where children learned early that silence at dinner usually meant there would be no dinner at all, and where money wasn't about comfort or ambition, but survival itself. The difference between eating tonight or listening to your stomach argue with reality until morning. Desperation didn't announce itself with shouting or violence. It crept in softly, turning ordinary men invisible and invisible men dangerous, because a man with nothing left has nothing left to protect except a single desperate choice. On West 125th Street, the Red Rooster Bar burned against the darkness like a defiant flame, jazz leaking through its doors, smoke curling into the cold night air, laughter covering tension, and quiet business being conducted in low voices where policy operators passed envelopes without names and understood that power didn't need to be explained. At exactly 11:34 p.m. on Saturday, April 20th, one man stepped out of that glow and into the night. Bumpy Johnson, 30 years old, already respected, already feared, already known as a man whose intelligence made him more dangerous than most men's weapons, walking with the calm confidence of someone who believed Harlem belonged to him, not by law, but by understanding how people worked. 3 bodyguards had been with him all evening, men trained to spot danger before it arrived, men who had protected his life more times than they could count. But at the doorway, Bumpy dismissed them casually, telling them he would walk the 50 feet to his Packard sedan alone, something he did often, a quiet display of control, a reminder to anyone watching that no one dared touch him on his own street. The guards hesitated, then obeyed, watching him step into the darkness with the confidence of a man who believed reputation was armor. What Bumpy did not know was that confidence makes noise, and someone in the shadows had been listening. 15 feet away, hidden by darkness and desperation, a man waited with a revolver clutched in shaking hands. Tommy Wright, 28 years old, broke, hungry, invisible to a city that had run out of mercy, promised $1,000, enough to feed his family, enough to buy medicine, enough to postpone disaster. He didn't hate Bumpy Johnson, didn't know him, didn't care about power or territory or criminal empires, only that his children were hungry and desperation had finally cornered him into this moment. As Bumpy reached into his pocket for his car keys, the audience already knows what he does not. A gun is raised, a finger rests on the trigger. History is holding its breath. And 5 minutes later, Harlem would never forget 6 words, because the question hanging in the air is terrifyingly simple. Who is more dangerous, the king who believes he is untouchable, or the starving man who has nothing left to lose? The night did not explode into chaos the way movies teach you to expect. It slowed down instead, stretched thin like wire pulled too tight, because real violence often arrives quietly, and everyone watching sensed it at the same time. Bumpy Johnson took one more step toward his Packard, still unaware that the space behind him had already been claimed, when a voice cut through the night, low, steady, and close enough to feel, telling him not to move, telling him there was a gun pointed at his back. The street froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Breath caught in throats, because everyone understood instantly what was happening. They were watching a hit unfold in real time. Bumpy turned slowly despite the warning, not rushing, not panicking, moving with the calm of a man who refused to give fear the satisfaction. And when he turned, he saw Thomas Wright standing 15 feet away, a revolver raised, barrel steady enough to kill even though the hand holding it was trembling. The gun was a .38 caliber, old but reliable, the kind desperation favored, and Wright's finger rested on the trigger with the weight of a man who knew this moment would decide whether his family ate or starved. Witnesses later said his hand shook, but his eyes were fixed, not hateful, not angry, just focused, like a man standing on the edge of something he could not turn away from. Everyone watching knew this wasn't personal, that no insult had been exchanged, no argument sparked this moment. This was business, cold and transactional, and that realization made it more terrifying. Then Wright spoke, voice cracking just enough to betray the fear underneath, and admitted what everyone already suspected, that he'd been paid to do this, that he'd been hired to kill Bumpy Johnson. The amount followed, almost whispered, $1,000, and the number hit the street harder than a gunshot because it was insultingly small. The price of a human life reduced to rent money and groceries, proof of how cheaply desperation could be purchased. The crowd understood immediately what that meant, that this wasn't a personal vendetta. It was an order passed down through shadows, an attempt by rivals who didn't want their own hands dirty. Somewhere uptown, far from this street corner, Dutch Schultz loomed invisibly over the moment, not present in body but heavy in consequence, his money moving men like pieces on a board. 5 seconds passed, then another, and those seconds stretched into something unbearable, because everyone knew this was the window, the thin slice of time where a life either ended or continued. 2 seconds from death, maybe less, and no one moved. No one shouted, because shouting would only make the trigger pull faster. Bumpy stood still, hands visible, face unreadable, refusing to beg, refusing to flinch, while Wright's breathing grew louder, uneven, the sound of a man wrestling with himself. This was the moment violence was supposed to happen, the moment audiences expect a gunshot, a body falling, blood on the pavement, the simple ending. But instead, the street waited, suspended between inevitability and surprise, because something was about to happen that no one watching could predict, something that would break every rule they thought they understood about power and fear. The gun remained raised, the finger still on the trigger, the silence so thick it felt physical, and in that silence, Harlem stood on the edge of history, seconds away from a murder that should have worked, should have ended exactly the way everyone expected, and yet somehow it didn't. The silence finally broke, not with a gunshot, not with a scream, but with something far more dangerous. A calm voice asking a question that didn't belong in a moment like this. Because instead of begging or threatening or trying to run, Bumpy Johnson smiled slightly and asked, "How much are you being paid?" The words landed wrong, like a record skipping, and for a brief second Thomas Wright forgot to breathe, forgot to tighten his grip on the gun, forgot what he was supposed to do next. Because this was not how executions went, not how power was supposed to sound. The street seemed to lean in as Wright hesitated, confusion flashing across his face, his gun still pointed at Bumpy's chest, but his certainty suddenly gone because the man he was meant to kill was treating him like a contractor, not an enemy. Finally, Wright answered, stammering, $1,000, the number sounding even smaller when spoken out loud, and something changed in that instant because Bumpy nodded slowly, as if evaluating a bad business deal, then repeated the number with quiet disbelief, calling it insulting, not just to him, but to Wright, because risking your life and your soul for $1,000 meant someone thought you were cheap. The power in the moment shifted, not violently, but decisively, as Bumpy reframed the entire situation from murder to negotiation, from life and death to value and compensation. He told Wright his life was worth more than that, and that Wright's courage, desperation, and willingness to follow orders were worth far more to the Wright employer, then calmly offered $5,000, 5 times the original price, not to kill him, but to put the gun down and work for him instead. Wright's arm began to shake harder now, not from fear of pulling the trigger, but from the shock of being seen as something other than disposable, the barrel dipping slightly as his mind struggled to catch up with what he was hearing. Before he could respond, footsteps thundered behind Bumpy as his 3 bodyguards burst out of the Red Rooster with guns drawn, surrounding Wright in seconds, shouting commands, ready to end the situation the old way, but Bumpy raised a single hand and stopped them cold, ordering them to lower their weapons, telling them this man was no longer a threat, but a businessman about to change employers. The bodyguards hesitated, disbelief written across their faces, yet they obeyed. because authority doesn't need volume when it's real. Bumpy then demanded $5,000 in cash immediately, and when the envelope appeared, thick and heavy with policy money, he walked toward Wright slowly, deliberately, closing the distance without fear, and held the cash out like an olive branch instead of a weapon. He told Wright to take it, to go home, to feed his family, to solve whatever problem had pushed him to this edge, and to come back in the morning to talk, promising that whether he worked for him or not, the money was his, payment for not pulling the trigger. That was when Wright broke, tears spilling down his face as his hands shook so badly he nearly dropped both the gun and the cash, whispering apologies, gratitude, disbelief, because in the space of seconds he had gone from would-be killer to spared man, from disposable tool to valued asset. The street watched in stunned silence as money changed hands instead of bullets, as mercy replaced murder, as power proved it didn't need violence to dominate, and the gun that should have fired never did. This was the moment everything flipped, the payoff no one expected, where the assassin cried and the king negotiated, and Harlem learned that night that the most dangerous weapon Bumpy Johnson carried wasn't a gun at all, but an understanding of human desperation sharp enough to stop a bullet in midair. The ride away from 125th Street was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that follows something no one knows how to name yet. The Packard gliding through Harlem while Bumpy Johnson sat in the back seat listening to his bodyguards talk over each other, voices sharp with fear, anger, and confusion, replaying the moment again and again, asking how they had let a man with a gun get that close, arguing about whether they should hunt Wright down, take the money back, and finish the job themselves before word spread. Bumpy let them talk, let the adrenaline burn off, understanding that fear needed somewhere to go. And then, when the noise finally became unbearable, he cut through it with a single calm sentence that changed how all three men understood what had just happened, telling them plainly that the man was brave, that he needed money, and that he followed orders, and that those three qualities were exactly what he looked for in people he employed. The car went silent because they realized Bumpy had never seen Wright as a threat in the usual sense. He had seen him as raw material, a product of the Depression, of a city where black men could work themselves into exhaustion and still fail to feed their families. Bumpy explained that a man willing to stand alone at night with a shaking gun pointed at the most powerful figure in Harlem wasn't weak. He was desperate, and desperation, when understood, could be redirected, reshaped, and bound with loyalty stronger than fear ever created. Killing Wright would have solved nothing, he said, because there would always be another desperate man, another gun, another cheap offer. But turning Wright into an ally sent a message that traveled faster than bullets, that working against him paid less than working for him. Bumpy admitted something else too, something his guards hadn't expected, that he had come closer to death that night than he liked to admit, that dismissing them and walking alone even 50 feet had been a mistake, and that Wright had taught him a lesson worth more than $5,000, reminding him that power does not make you invincible, and reputation does not stop a hungry man with nothing to lose. He told them he would never again walk unprotected, never again assume territory guaranteed safety, because the Depression had created men who would risk everything for very little, and ignoring that reality was how kings died. Then he confirmed what shocked them most, that Wright was expected back in the morning, that the offer was real, and that if Wright showed up on time, sober, and ready to listen, he would be given work, food for his family, medicine for his wife, and a chance to turn survival into purpose. This wasn't charity, Bumpy explained. It was strategy, because loyalty born from understanding lasts longer than loyalty born from terror, and men who are given a reason to live will protect the one who gave it to them. In that car, rolling through a Harlem shaped by poverty and pride, the guards realized they were being shown the machinery behind Bumpy's power, the logic beneath the legend, and why fear alone never built empires that lasted. Sunday morning confirmed that the night before had not been a trick, because Thomas Wright showed up early, cleaned up, wearing his best worn suit, clutching the envelope that had saved his family. And from that morning forward, his life bent in a direction no one on 125th Street could have predicted, as he began at the bottom and worked his way up, proving himself quietly, reliably, without complaint, until he became one of the most trusted men in Bumpy Johnson's organization, a transformation that lasted 27 years and ended only with Wright's death decades later. He never forgot the night he had stood with a gun in his hands, and he kept that revolver afterward. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how close he had come to destroying his own life for $1,000, and how $5,000, offered at the right moment, had bought him dignity, stability, and a future. The story traveled fast through Harlem, whispered on corners, repeated in back rooms, retold until it hardened into legend, because criminals understood its meaning immediately, that killing Bumpy Johnson paid less than working for him, and that anyone trying to hire a man to kill Bumpy would simply be training Bumpy's next lieutenant. Rivals learned the lesson the hard way, especially Dutch Schultz, who discovered that desperation cuts both ways, that cheap money creates unreliable killers, and that Bumpy could always outbid him by offering something more powerful than cash alone. After that night, attempts on Bumpy's life stopped, not because men feared him more, but because they trusted him more, because the street understood he paid better, protected better, and remembered loyalty longer than anyone else. Wright's rise became proof of a philosophy Bumpy made sure every new recruit heard, that mercy, when used strategically, is not weakness, that understanding why a man would pull a trigger gives you more power than threatening him ever could. Decades later, people remembered the question more than the gun, the calm words that stopped violence cold. How much are you being paid? 6 words that reframed murder into negotiation and turned an enemy into family. Bumpy Johnson and Thomas Wright are both gone now, but the lesson they left behind remains, that power built only on fear collapses the moment fear fades, while power built on understanding endures long after the men themselves are gone. And the question lingers, uncomfortable and timeless, asking every generation the same thing it asked Harlem that night: whether the most dangerous force in the world is violence itself, or the intelligence to know when mercy will cut deeper than a bullet ever could.